Hey everyone. So, at time of writing, we've just wrapped up our first season on Hillforts. It was a lot of work. We covered around 150 sites in the south of Britain over 15 episodes, and we have much more to cover. In fact, so much that I'm still scrambling to get to all of these sites. I mean, just the weekend before this, I was in Worcestershire, catching some places I'd not seen before, partially in the snow, which was different, and particularly as the radius gets further and further out from Dorset, where we're based, getting to these and finding those gaps in both the clouds and my work timetable does of course become more challenging. So the rest of season 2 is coming later this year, but we had the extremely exciting opportunity to sit down with Toby Driver and talk about the Hillforts of Wales, and not only did I not want to leave this just sitting in the can, I also wanted to get folks excited for everything there is still to see, particularly in Wales. I would like to quickly say at this point, considering I am at best an amateur enthusiast, when it comes to ancient history and archaeology, I have no credentials to my name. I just really like it, and we source our work as best as we can. I have been blown away at just how generous the archaeology community is. Everyone who actually works in the field, don't believe anyone who wants to smack talk archaeologists. You could not possibly find a more open, friendly, enthusiastic and unpretentious group of people. I was kind of worried when approaching guys like Toby or Miles Russell and others that they would be, yeah, thanks, we have real jobs and things to do, which, yeah, fair enough. But yet their willingness to talk to us, for example, I am basically nobody, so to be able to chat about their work and enthuse about Hillforts, it has been a real privilege, and I'm incredibly grateful to Toby for taking the time. In terms of making this episode, episodes that creep over the 25-minute mark can end up taking months to put together, and that's because for everything I say, I want to have a corresponding clip to put behind it. Hence why we've been filming for 6+ years and are only now beginning to get these out. However, to keep this manageable, for the most part, we're going to run this more like a podcast. I've got lots of very pretty Wales footage to run in the background, which also happens to be much faster to assemble. So, huge thanks once again to Toby Driver, and with that said, intro drop. Oh, just by the by, while I have appeared on camera on the channel occasionally, I do mostly feature just as a voiceover, so some of you are about to have that moment like, wait, he looks like that? That's not what I pictured at all. That is just a thing that is happening, but on we go. All right, well, Dr. Toby Driver, it's so good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, great to see you. That's absolutely brilliant to be here. Thanks.
Yeah.
And welcome, Croeso, welcome virtually to Wales, even though we're not in the same country, as it were.
Oh yeah, fantastic. It's kind of a funny one for the viewers at home. I've been thinking about Toby quite a lot this summer, but for quite an amusing reason. When we first spoke a few months back, and I was a bit nervous, oh man, I want to see if I can get an interview with Toby, but I don't know if he'll talk to us. And we spoke, and we said, yeah, we'll find a date in the diary. But I remember you saying we'll have to see how busy the summer is, because we've had quite a lot of dry weather, and it might be a big one for crop marks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, these dry summers are getting busier and busier now, and it is the changing climate, So yeah, it's a pretty intense summer that we've just had.
Yeah. And so the funny thing, every time we had a really nice sunny day outside, and it had been a bunch of days without any rain, I'm just picturing Toby in his office just yes, good, gets drier.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because it's tough on the ground for the farmers when you get a drought, but those conditions are when it's really pushing the archaeology out of the ground. And you can really see that new stuff. Fantastic, really, yeah.
But it's so, I've been catching this with some of the episodes I've been doing recently. I'll read the research and there's a field system nearby. And I'm like, is there? I didn't see that. So I'll look back at my footage nope, just don't have the conditions. Lovely green grass covering everything. So having those conditions to actually catch a banjo or some sort of feature is, that's a real win. But
yeah, exactly. You've got to catch it when it comes along, and then the minute it starts raining, it all disappears. So yeah, that's what my life is like it used to be between June and August, and now it's between March, April and September. That's how the sort of season's extended, yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, tell you what, I've launched straight into this. Toby, could you just catch everyone up on what you do, what you're involved in?
Yeah, so I'm a senior investigator for aerial survey. I'm an aerial archaeologist at the Royal Commission in Wales. We're based in Aberystwyth. So my day job is active aerial survey, flying across Wales, looking for new monuments, monitoring the sites that we already know about, their condition. So that's my sort of main job. Also, analysing those photographs, getting them out to other people, other archaeologists, if we have new discoveries. Also looking at LiDAR and checking new discoveries there. And then that also extends out. I do some work on drones and drone photogrammetry with my brilliant survey colleagues here. And then if I'm really lucky, I get to go out of the office and help on the surveys of prehistoric and Roman monuments as well, which is my other area of expertise.
Oh, fantastic. Now, I first heard about your work on formerly Twitter, now Blue Sky, and have to at this point. I know a lot of people watching will already have this on their shelves already, but for those who don't know, the Hillforts of Iron Age Wales. This book is absolutely incredible. You have to get it. It's a really easy read. It's a fantastic overview of both Welsh Hillforts, but also just the Iron Age in Britain in general. It's been incredibly helpful for what I'm doing. In fact, this funny thing keeps happening. You know, I had a modest list of sort of Iron Age and Hillfort sites I wanted to catch through Wales, and then I'll turn a page and there'll be this beautiful like aerial shot or a description of a site, and I'll be like, I've not really caught. So I'll go down my list and it's not there. I'm like, oh damn it, Driver, give me a chance. So the list has just been getting longer and longer and longer. But yeah,
I'm sorry about that. It's a book with all the incredible stuff of Wales in it. So I'm really sorry. I've shown everybody how amazing the Welsh Iron Age is. But that's very kind. Thanks for your kind words. The Hillforts of Iron Age Wales is important for me to get out. You know, what I do and the things I do with my Hillfort research is all about sharing knowledge of these sites to as wider audience as possible, not keeping it to ourselves, not keeping it to the academics. And the book is specifically designed and written to be well illustrated, lots of nice pictures, lots of easy text to read, but not skimping on the academic stuff, not skimping on the detailed dating and all the other stuff as well. You know, no cutting back on detail. It's just packaging it so it's attractive to read and telling everybody about the wonders that we have in this part of Western Britain. And I have to thank the designers at Logston Press. You know, Richard Wheeler did an incredible job on the design of the book as well. But it's spreading the love, really. That's what the book's about.
Yeah. And, I mean, because I wasn't in the scene in maybe, like, you know, the 90s or earlier, maybe I'm wrong in this, but it feels like at the moment, like, Hillforts have sort of massively blown up in the last, maybe the last decade. I mean, of course, it feels like that to you and I, because, you know, we've been part of, you know, hashtag Hillforts Wednesday, and so, you know, we're with a lot of people. This might partly be because, you know, like drones have sort of massively taken off, pun intended, in the last decade, and so a lot more people are seeing these sites like top down. Do you think? I mean,
I think you've got it. Actually, it's very interesting. I mean, this is the thing with archaeology in general. I think Hillforts were big, 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s. People were looking at defensive schemes, attack strategies, how these may have kept an army at bay, all that sort of thing. And one has to say, probably by the 70s and 80s, I think people were a bit bored of Hillforts in the Iron Age. It wasn't sexy enough, you know. And it's J.D. Hill's big papers in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, that grabbed people by the scruff of the neck and said, we're not doing this right, you know. Are we asking the right questions? These aren't just familiar, traditional Asterix villages. You know, there's a huge amount of really odd stuff going on in the Iron Age. And I think that galvanised a whole new generation of younger archaeologists to say, you know, what the heck is this? What are we talking about? You know, Roman armies and slingshots and spears and attacks on Hillforts. There's so much more to the Iron Age that we don't understand. And that's kept on snowballing, I think, to where we are now. And you know, still today, this morning in Wales, there are huge questions that we haven't grasped yet about the Iron Age and its Hillforts. Things that won't be settled in my lifetime. So it's a really exciting time and area of study to get your teeth into. You know, whether you're old, young, PhD researcher or anything. There's just stuff to do, stuff to answer.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, kind of early on, I wanted to, and
I've realised I've not really been playing this card enough. I am technically a quarter Welsh, so I can kind of play that card. But my grasp of the language is comparatively poor. I am making some steady progress. Every time I visit, I maybe pick up a little bit more. But anyone who explores the Hillforts of Wales has to somewhat contend with the titles of some of these, some of which are easier to pick up than others. With a lot of these things, of course, some of the linguistic building blocks, become quite familiar. So, for example, care. But I'm just assuming, just to check. So, care. That's presumably from a root of caster. Is that from the Latin?
Yeah, castorum or something probably. Yeah, there is a bit of Latin still in the Welsh language, but don't test me on the detail of this. Kaya or Gaia, as it mutates to, is fort. Normally Roma fort Caerleon, Fort of the Legion for Caerleon Isca in South Wales. There is a bit of Latin. The Romans modernised parts of the Welsh language. So the modern technology that the Romans bought, pont for bridge, fenest for window, that sort of thing, have hung on in the Welsh language. But the rest of it's very old, obviously, as well. But the pronunciation gets a lot of people. I saw you at Penacreek Hillfort the other day, on Monday, I think, out in the sunshine at Brecon, cracking Hillfort. So to English speakers, that would look like Penacrug. What's a crug?
I have to say that's generally kind of how I've been saying it. So good to know.
So a krieg is a flat-topped mound or a sort of flat-topped summit. A krieg, a lump in the landscape. And pen is head. Pen or ben is head, and is on. The Y is on. So Pen E Krug becomes Penacreek. It's the head of the mound, basically. So you're on the summit of this flat-topped hill. So the language is describing the shape of the hill. Not all hill forts are kriegs, because they don't have that particular look to them. So you start to get really good descriptive language going on there. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah, well there we go. So what we're going to do is, for the viewers at home, I'm going to flash these up on the screen. I'm going to attempt a pronunciation of this, and then Toby can kind of rescue me. And
let's see how I get on. That's a test for early in the morning, isn't it?
Okay, so first one, and I'm not 100% clear on this. I think it's like Llnash Point.
Excellent. Definitely Nash Point, lovely place, eroding coast of Promontory Fort on the Vale of Glamorgan coast. So hopefully we've all got the pronunciation of that one nailed down.
Yeah,
so it's good.
So it's a little bit more merciful, just as you've kind of gotten over the bridges. You get an easy start there. But yes, okay. So more seriously, so the next one, Kaya. Now, Sion.
Kaya Seon, really? Kaya Seon? Seon, is that relating to the river name up there? That's on the Conwy Mountain Hill Fort up on the north coast there, isn't it? Kaya Seon. So, without doing my research, not 100% on the Seon, but I think the Seon Valley is below Conwy Mountain. But Kaya Seon, yeah, Kaya. And you see that mutated to Gaia with a G as well sometimes.
Oh, yes, yeah. Okay, then we've got, fairly straightforward, so just Porth y Raw.
Yeah, Porth y Raw is Portharawa. I'd say Portharawa. It should be Porth with a sort of flatter O, really. Portharawa on the south coast near Solva in Pembrokeshire. So Porth is a harbour or landing point on the coast. Arawa, again, not quite sure the origin of the Rao there. It may be a local place name, but it's basically a harbourage or an anchorage underneath this cracking promontory fort. Yeah.
Next, so this would be Carai.
Almost, Carai.
And this is just outside Cardiff. This is a fort that you've got quite a connection to, I understand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've done bits and bobs around it, but this is the fabulous Kaya Heritage Project run by Cardiff University with the community of Ely in Cardiff. Excavations on Caerau Hill Fort, and then a community centre, Hillfort themed play area, loads of community work there. Brilliant work by Ollie Davis and Dave Wyatt down there. But Caerau is almost a plural of Hillfort. I think possibly because it's so big, or there are so many ditches, it's like forts. That's what Caerau means. It's like heavens, there's so much of it. It's forts. So that's what Caerau means.
No, brilliant. Now, this is where I start to struggle a little bit because we're running a little low on vowels. Very much gets into, I'll have a consonant, please, Carol, for all of these next ones. So, okay.
Plenty of vowels in there, the W's. So,
well, yeah. So, tweem, balim?
Tumbalum, that is. Tumbalum.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure of the whole the meaning behind that, but it's a mound on it's a hugely prominent hill fort overlooking the South Wales over Newport and Cwmbran. Tumbalum, fantastic name. Just boom, straight out with that. It's fantastic. Tumbalum.
Yeah. And then we've got. Okay, now up to recently, I wasn't catching.
You can do it.
The double D, like it's kind of TH thing, like is something I kept missing. So, Minith Igea.
Monothergaia. So this is, I've been coming to Wales since I was a kid, and the E's you always thought was an E. The Y is an E, but it's all quite. You've got to flatten out those vowels. Monothergaia. So Monith is mountain. And Ergaia is the fort, or Monith. It's a sort of fort on the mountain, really. Things are back to front. If you see Lloyd's Bank in Welsh and Cymraeg, it'd be Bank Lloyd's. So this is Monothergaia is sort of the fort on the mountain. So the sort of the subject is after the mountain there, really. So
okay, yeah. The next one, and considering how important this site is, I am embarrassed that... I want to say, okay, my best guess is Treacheiri, but...
That's not bad, actually. That's pretty good. So it's Treacheiri. The local pronunciation will vary. So Treacheiri is a really interesting place name because it's town, a tre is a town. So Treacheiri, the town of the Ceiri. And... interpretations of this name have varied over the last 300 years. Generally, you'll see it as town of the giants. So giant is Cewri with a W, and people think it's a mutation of that. So it's the Treacheiri, the town of the giants, which would make sense. It's full of houses. It's like a sort of Welsh Pompeii. But earlier, other descriptions suggest Ceiri is like Cairi, which is plural of hill forts. So it's town of the fortresses. So Treacheiri still has two potential interpretations. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Okay.
This is a fabulous place name. This is absolutely brilliant. Rachel Pope's site here.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, I was going to go Penny, but again, I'm trying to flatten out that Y again.
It's the Y. Yeah.
So Penaclodai.
Almost. Yeah. You got the right I at the end of it. So it's. But double D is a the sound. So Penaclodii, which is literally the top of the ditches, basically, or top of the banks, basically. The clodai, the clouth, sort of ditch or bank, basically. So it's top of the banks, basically. The multiple banks on top of the hill. There's Penaclodii Hill Fort, one of the largest in Wales, and the Clwydian Hills.
Yeah. And finally, this one, I passed this just a few days ago, actually. This one has been giving me the runaround. Good luck. God, can I pass this one over to you? What do we think?
Ysgyryd Fawr. So the Y at the start is Ysgyryd Fawr. Again, Ysgyryd, I'm not sure about the origin of that. A Fawr is big, so Fawr is big, Fach is small, so that's very easy. But this is a huge shark fin in the landscape of Monmouthshire with a hill fort and enclosure on the top, probably pretty early, probably Bronze Age, probably even Neolithic origins up there. It's a really unusual site, and then crowned by a medieval chapel. So Ysgyryd Fawr, nice place.
Yeah. I mean, funny, one of the problems I have with these names, not so much this of Welsh, it's the same thing I have when I'm doing, for example, like church crawling, where I'm going, you have these churches which are named after saints, and that has very little to do with the way I experience the church. So I think of these places, it's like, it's that place like outside of Winchester, and they have like a Tornai font or something. So I very much, with a lot of these hill fort sites, I picture them based on where they are on the map. I have many people, I have a sort of Google map with a billion pins almost obscuring the earth beneath because there's so many things to catch. And so I remember these sites based on where you can find them, like in the the map of Wales, but then the actual individual titles I tend to get a bit turned around. So I realised, like, in the course of this conversation, I'm probably going to embarrass myself further by just completely forgetting where these are. But
I wouldn't worry about it. There's loads of guys, loads of months, loads of hours. So I've sort of been crawling over them for too long. But occasionally, still, I know a name, but I can't picture which hill it's on. Pretty much the aerial photography takes me across Wales from Anglesey to Chepstow. So I've seen most sites over many years when I've been doing my air photography. So it tends to lock in the brain. Yeah, it's good.
Well, there you go. Now, okay, so to get onto a bit more of the history around this. Now, and this is, really the same across Britain, but there's quite a lot of unanswered questions about the early formation of hill forts. We can put this in a rough bracket time-wise. We've got sort of towards the late Bronze Age, but as is always the way with archaeology, the why is very elusive. Could you just help us out in terms of what we do know about, the formation of iron, at the close of the Bronze Age, the beginning of the Iron Age? How is it that these hill fort sites are coming together?
It's a difficult and complex issue, but there's some simple threads we can think about. We know that Middle Bronze Age, about 1500 BC, people were living in family farms with upland field systems and smaller enclosures. There are some smaller sort of defended farmsteads being built in Wales at that time. We're just starting to recognise those. But it's around 1100 BC, 1000 BC. We start to have a climatic deterioration across Britain, a wettening of the uplands, increase in rainfall. The general idea is that the uplands become more difficult to live in. Late Bronze Age communities on the Severn Estuary as well, researched by Martin Bell, those are becoming inundated by rising sea levels. So people are moving inland. And so 700 BC, you're getting this crunch point, this pressure on the land of people moving off Long Hill family farms, trying to find valleys to live in, people moving in from the coast, and people think that may be leading to early sort of clashes and the need to establish new defended homesteads. So we have the construction of early hill forts. Many of the hill forts in the borderlands date to about 1200, 1100 BC. So climatic deterioration pushing people to live in a more sort of warlike society, can we say. Hills have always been good places to be, though. This is a thing, particularly in Wales. We see Neolithic use of hills. Carn Goch in Carmarthenshire, we've got a big Neolithic long cairn on a hilltop, and loads of Bronze Age barriers on hills. So hills have always been good places to go. For meeting, for trading, you can recognise a hill somebody's described to you. So hills have always been good places to go, but somehow they begin to be enclosed and fortified in the last 1,000 years BC. But, there's a lot more stuff going on here, particularly in Cardiff around the KIRI project we just talked about. Ollie Davis and Professor Neil Sharples in Cardiff have been doing a lot of work here because KIRI is really interesting. It's on the Ely River, the hill fort. The Ely River is famous, well, not famous, it's well known for lots of late Bronze Age hoards of metalwork, axes, swords and things deposited in the river. So their work is focusing on how people define communities and boundaries and territories in the late Bronze Age. It seems to be by depositing ornate metalwork in rivers and river edges and so on. So great conspicuous public displays of this is our land, this is our community, this is bringing people together. And that seems to have vanished from the record by about 600 BC. And we get hill forts instead. And so their idea is that these hill forts are the new ways to define boundaries, territory, community, bringing people together to build hill forts. So that's another shift in our thinking.
And we'll talk about votive sites in a little bit because it's a fascinating sort of part of this. It's interesting that with human behaviour, it doesn't take much of a push. If you have a few people, on the move, and as you said, there's some stress in the landscape. It doesn't need to be a wide-ranging kind of cataclysm. We don't need some sort of volcano to displace everyone. If you just have a bit of movement, you get this sort of domino effect where, you say people are being much more, protective of the space. Something I hadn't thought to ask, but as you mention it, I mean, when we're talking about the sort of Neolithic and Bronze Age use of these hilltops, these are places where people are visiting here. But do we have evidence of people living up at these spaces, or people going up there but they're not staying in the Neolithic and Bronze Age?
Yeah, we've got causewayed enclosures which are sort of built sort of 3,500 BC, 3,000 BC, and over the last 15 years, principally through some of my era of photography, we've been discovering those through South Wales, and excavations have produced evidence of some of these Neolithic hilltop enclosures. And indeed, Cairi Hillforts in Ely in Cardiff, not to keep going back to that, their excavations, Cardiff's excavations, discovered that there's a massive Neolithic enclosure, causeway enclosure in the Hillfort, and the later Bronze Age Hillfort entrance is aligned on the Neolithic entrance, and then the Iron Age defences go around it. So that's the hill people have been living on for an awfully long time. But it's a wider philosophical issue, this, with the way I approach hillforts. I've always tried to dismantle hillforts, learn more about their architecture, how they are built, and avoiding generalisation at all possible. I always want to go to a fort and pull it to pieces. And people always think hillforts have just arrived. This inevitability, especially with the ones down with you. I mean, the southern England, they're enormous, absolutely enormous. There's this lump of hillfort arrives and sits in the landscape. And what fascinates me is, what happened on day one of construction? What happened 3 months before that? So who came up there on horseback with 20 people or with their council of elders to decide that that was a place that they were going to start building? How did they acquire ownership of that hill? Surely somebody else owned it before them. Was it spiritually important? How on earth did they think they could take it over and start constructing a rampart? Who were they going to move into that hill fort? And this is the question that Ollie and Neil are looking at as well. How do you take people who are living on family farms and say, well, we're going to put you behind a locked gate and 3 ditches, and you're going to have to live with your nearest neighbours with barking dogs and things? That's a huge change in society. So forget the hill forts that are standing there and we're fed up with looking at them like Maiden Castle. How on earth did that come to be? What's day one of getting your 300 people together, all the baskets, all the beer, all the food, all the construction tools? That's a really interesting part of prehistory that we still don't know enough about, I think.
Yeah, and I mean that when you say it makes sense that a lot of these places are not, I guess what we'd call greenfield sites. The fact that there was something established there, you can sort of see, when you've got a Neolithic causewayed enclosure, for example, the ditches are somewhat slight, but it doesn't take a great leap of imagination to be like, well, guys, I don't know if we just cut this out a bit deeper, we've got something going here. So you could definitely, it makes sense that people would be going to these sites. Which, of course, a lot of them have, huge significance going back as it is.
But also that, not to go off on a tangent, but what we see particularly in Wales, the crags, the outcrops, the coastal promontories, is that many natural outcrops look like ramparts and ditches. And what we see is hill forts augmenting and adding to huge ridges and sills in the rock. And we know the geology of those nowadays. We know that's a built rampart, that's a bit of rock. But going back,
not always. I think all of us have squinted at like, is that a no? Yes, no, not sure.
Exactly, and I think a lot of the summits that people have chosen to build on, a lot of the coastal promontories, that prehistoric communities may have thought, that they're looking at an abandoned fortress. They're looking at somewhere that the gods or the ancestors built and it decayed and fell to pieces, and they're coming back to this place to re-inhabit it. I really do think that's a major part of what we're seeing in some of the hilltop enclosures. So there'd be huge spiritual sanctity behind some of these mountain tops, and people think they're taking over these old walls of the ancestors that have lain dormant for centuries. So that would be another important part of it, I think.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah.
Now, we were talking a moment ago about votive sites, and this is very interesting. I'd not really clocked these before reading your book, because, as someone who's exploring Wales in the modern time, they're probably not the first places you think of, but these are the places where, like, some of the most valuable finds and some of the most valuable insights we have into the late Bronze Age and the Iron Age have come from. Could you tell us a little bit about some of these votive lakes and these sites?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that really interests me. We have the blurring in, I guess you can call it sort of Celtic times, between religion and everyday world. So we have votive offerings, odd things going on inside the hill forts as well as outside the hill forts, in rubbish pits and the way houses are orientated and all this. But in Wales, we're fortunate enough to have two votive lakes that we know about, both of which we know about because they were disturbed by construction, which makes me think there's quite a few other ones around, actually. So I'm going to spend my retirement tracking those down. But we've got two. We've got one on Anglesey, Llyn Cerrig Bach, the Lake of the Small Pebbles, on Western Anglesey, which was discovered by chance when they were building a new Royal Air Force airfield there. Well, they'd already built a Second World War airfield on the dunes, but all the sand was getting into the engines of the aircraft. So they drag-lined the nearby peat wetlands to spread peat all over the runways. And just as they were harrowing and reseeding the grass over the runways, people started picking up chains and bits of shield and swords and various things from the runways. So the very excellent groundsman there got everybody to pick everything up. And we got about 150 pieces of treasure from the Iron Age lake there. So there's a lot of research being done. New research on Operation Nightingale going on there at the moment, which I'm lucky enough to be involved with. So we've got Llyn Cerrig Bach votive lake on Anglesey. People were throwing things into that from about 300 BC to the Roman conquest of Anglesey. And the second one we know about is Llyn Fawr in the South Wales valleys, just above the Rhondda Valley. And this was discovered in the 1920s during reservoir construction. They drained a whole mountain lake and started cutting the peat out of it and produced cauldrons and weaponry. Some of the earliest iron artefacts we have from Britain, around 600 BC. So I urge people to go and see these sites. Llyn Cerrig Bach, you can visit on Anglesey if you go around the back of the RAF Valley, the big fast jet fighter school for Britain. There's a nice plaque and you can see a bit of the lake surviving. But Llyn Fawr, my word, in the South Wales valleys, South Wales valleys, we've had all the collieries dismantled there now. It's a big sort of open landscape. But right at the head of the valley, the Regos Escarpment drops down. And in this huge escarpment, this huge cauldron-like setting, is Llyn Fawr Lake. It's now a reservoir, but what a magical place that place is. So important in Western Britain.
Mm-hmm. Well, fantastic. Now, in terms of our timeline, we're now sort of talking a little bit later in the Iron Age. Something that we've been seeing a lot when we've been, for example, studying hill forts and the cultures down here in southern England, we see, these kind of beats that happen at sort of roughly the same time, in the same way that, these hill fort sites are coalescing in the early Iron Age, your sort of 600 BC. We then have a very sort of sudden, within a generation or two, around 100 BC, the complete opposite appears to happen. We have suddenly people leaving these large defended hill forts, the simple, they're sort of leaving the hilltops for kind of the valleys and the riversides. Now, to what extent do we see that in Wales, or is it a very different kind of chronology to what's happening in like southern Britain?
No, we've got similar things happening, particularly in southwestern Wales. But as you say there, Britannia was a big place in prehistory. Fragmented communities across it, lots of interconnectivity, lots of communication. But what was happening in Dorset in the Iron Age would have been a world away what's happening in West Wales in terms of the people and the economy and everything. But we are starting to pick it up. Archaeologists like Ken Murphy, who's been excavating an enormous amount of sites in the southwest over the last 20, for him last 40 years, but particularly in the last 20 years we've been picking up more evidence of this with Harold Migham and Ken Murphy's work in the southwest. Wales hasn't seen so many hill fort excavations and not so much good dating until recent years, and probably fewer excavations in the south of Britain where we have a better understanding of chronology, more pots, more artefacts. But what we've got coming out now is about 200 to 100 BC, similar time frame, and apparent abandonment, a hiatus in hill fort living. We're seeing this at Portharaua, Coastal Promontory Fort and Solva, which is seeing a lot of excavations. Pendennis Hill Fort in Aberystwyth, which is excavated by HENEB, the Welsh Archaeological Trusts, a couple of years ago. So we're seeing these changes in the way people are living. And as Ken has put it, he doesn't know yet with the dating whether that's generational or even in a matter of a decade, or is it a single event? It's really interesting to start seeing this emerging. But it's interesting. Again, we're going back to this Hillfort being a lump of a Hillfort. It's always been there. Maiden Castle. It's just there in the landscape. But have you ever tried to build a Hillfort or live in it? Or maintain the ramparts, maintain the ditches. In Wales, we've got pretty rubbish building stone in parts of West Wales, particularly Pendennis Hillfort at Aberystwyth. The local shale is not very good. It splits, it collapses. And excavations at that Hillfort have shown bulges and collapses in the ramparts being patched up with beach cobbles from the beach below the fort. And one would suggest that these Hillforts have a time they look amazing and they're finished or almost finished, probably a continuing building, but then the father dies or the mother dies who's been running it, their son or daughter takes over. They want to do things differently. They want to maintain, shut that bit of the fort off. It's always been difficult to look after. So these places are difficult places to maintain. You need the people to build them. And so maybe there's many reasons why people abandon living in these huge, enormous hilltop villages and go to smaller, prestigious, defended farms. Lots of reasons.
And it's a funny one because when I was talking to Miles, he made this point that we have an unfortunate habit of looking at hill forts and kind of thinking about them in the ways that we think about, for example, medieval castles. And that framing is very unhelpful because there's so many things that don't parallel over. When we think of medieval castles, you're thinking about things that are built for sieges, for example. They're for lots of sustained conflict. And of course, whilst there's this ongoing discussion about exactly how martial, like how military really is a hill fort, or is that a wrong framing? So there's that aspect, but it is very. I mean, in Dorset, you can go up a hill fort sometimes like, it's a bit blowy up here. You can see why the valleys and the riversides would have been attractive if an intensely defended site is no longer really required. But of course, in Wales, as you say, it's such a world away on pretty much everywhere. Not just in distance, but in terms of the physical landscape these people are using. It's very interesting that what would be an established, way of life for, centuries would, in potentially such a short space of time, people just kind of almost do the opposite. Like, we're not on these hilltops so much anymore. And
it's interesting. I mean, what I like about Wales, and it's what my PhD about 15 years ago was all about. It's about Hillfort monumentality, about the Hillfort as artefact, really. But my big contention with Hillforts all the way through was that you have a Hillfort, massive Hillfort, has one record on the Historic Environment Record and 3 paragraphs, right? You find a Bronze Age pot, and you can have 3 pages about that in a site report. And drawings and chemical analysis and pottery analysis and everything as well. So why does a pot get more attention than an entire hill fort? And it's this sort of almost a boredom with hill forts. They're just so big. It's a nice place to walk your dog, but my God, who's going to start understanding this? And so what we see in Wales is actually, rather than these huge lumps of hill forts, is people with a reduced workforce, a more challenged economy in the Iron Age, are building where they need to build. They're putting ramparts where they really want one, maybe forgetting about the rampart at the back of their hill fort. So we see the smaller power bases in the Welsh Iron Age where they really need to do the work, and it's about the front-facing ramparts, the gateways. They're making this impression of fear and terror and awe for those approaching a fort. So, traditionally you would say, well, it's got a bank and a ditch and it's got a gate. It must be a fortress with an army inside. And I think more, it's even like a country house. If you go to a country house 200 years ago, you'll get in an awful lot of trouble if you go to the servants' door at the back. You've got to go up the front avenue to the front door and be received correctly. There's a correct path of approach. So we see in hill forts, it's not about whether you can get into it or not at the back. Yes, you can, but a respectful way to approach your enemy or your friend is to come to the front door. the correct path of approach, be received with a show of strength at the gate, and then be allowed in. It's about respect, fear, terror. And we see this in sort of non-Western communities around the world as well. So it's a complicated thing, these hill forts, aren't they?
Yeah, and I mean, as you point out with the parallels to you say sort of stately homes 200 years ago, it is interesting that they would make a point. You have maybe a sort of turreted gateway that looks very elaborate. Of course, now we from these homes from Victorian times would never stand up to any sort of actual military incursion. And I mean, it's a wonder that maybe a lot of these hill fort sites never actually saw combat. These fortifications were not necessarily tested, but
it's very interesting. We've come a long way from. I mean, people like Mortimer Wheeler and the great archaeologists of the 30s and 40s did enormous amounts of work, and they were in between two world wars. I mean, their whole life they had London being blitzed. Of course, they were thinking about the war and attack and military, and they saw the great conflicts in Africa in the 19th century. There's a lot of good work done then. And you can find any parallel around the world that you want for combat and ritual combat, Polynesia, North America. But things like, feasting and raiding and feuding do fascinate me. You see the First Nations Americans, I think it's the Sioux Indians, that's essentially almost a hunter-gatherer society, so we've got to watch out with our parallels. But there they had this practice of counting coup, which is to raid your neighbour's village, ride through on horseback, and if you can touch your enemy, it shows your bravado, the young men's bravado. So they'd ride into the neighbour's village, or the sort of teepee settlement. If you can touch your enemy with a spear or something else, that's a certain level of bravery. If you can touch with your hand or part of your body and ride out alive, that's even more bravery, and you get extra feathers on your headdress. And these things really interest me. You can do an awful lot of ritual combat and shows of strength outside a hill fort. You can burn it, you can raid it, you can threaten people without actually getting into a standing war like the Battle of Hastings. And I think neighbourhood conflicts, they're quite a part of modern rural landscape today, and I think they always have been a part of the Iron Age. These vicious, violent feuds between people were probably going on.
And it's we have to, especially for a modern audience, our notion of conflict is probably shaped more like like a kind of like a Lord of the Rings, like, right, here is one massive standing army which has got a big ideology, and here is another massive standing army with an ideology, and they will both absolutely clash and fight to the last man. I mean, even medievalists would be like, oh, no, that's not how it normally goes. But in the Iron Age, like you say, even more so, rather than thinking of these the whole notion of a standing army in Iron Age terms is virtually forget it. But these are not people carrying out like a war of extermination against their neighbours. Like you say, the manner in which conflict is being done is very different from what we would picture as like a battle or a skirmish, and it's,
Well, we see glimpses of it as well. We're so far away from the thoughts and the minds of people in the Iron Age, but we can reconstruct stuff. Sure. And we can see some of the finds from the Welsh Iron Age. We have some of the shields that we find. We have a North Wales shield design type that we can recognise from finds at Moed Haradig and the Talyllyn Hoard. And the Talyllyn shields are on display in St Fagans Museum, National Museum in St Fagans in Cardiff. This great shield has 3 triscalar devices on it, these great complicated Celtic spirals on it, and each one is different, and there's quite a lot of evidence that these were quite magical, potent symbols to ward off and to frighten your enemy as they came towards you with the shield on their arm. You can actually, quite magical symbol to see on the battlefield or in a field of conflict or even hand-to-hand conflict. And there's a lot of magic and power in this. Of course, the famous description by Tacitus of the attack on Anglesey, where the Roman soldiers crossed the Menai Strait to Anglesey and were cast into stone and frozen by these furies, these women. They greeted them with wild hair, shouting curses. And we hear this of druids in battle as well, being able to throw curses towards the enemy and freeze them. There's an awful lot of superstition, fear in those times. That's a liminal space between what's daily life and what's the other world. So a really interesting bigger area of discussion there, really.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I mean, speaking of all this, we will talk about the Romans shortly. Just before we move on from this late Iron Age, to the pre-Roman era of Wales, again, just making a comparison to southern Britain, we have the classical writers. We finally, the curtain starts to come up. In 100 BC, we start to get some actual names entering the written record. And so, for example, while, we have to kind of be a bit cautious with these, we start seeing these tribal grouping names, so the Silures and the Demetae, come into the historical record. Now, again, because of the movement we mentioned in southern Britain, because the Hillforts are being abandoned, we have a very new political organisation happening. And so we have to be very cautious to back project. So, for example, in Dorset, the Durotriges, we don't want to be like, oh yeah, and then the Durotriges came and they built these Hillforts. It's like, no, that's not, we're not really happy with that framing. In terms of, again, there being quite a different thing happening in Wales, can we back project these tribal groupings? Are they somewhat older than what we're seeing maybe in southern, what is now England, or is it about the same? Like we're very cautious to superimpose these names backward.
I'm really interested in all this. I'm really interested in trying to make a connection to the people in the Iron Age of Wales. And I'm even more interested in the way people get a bit bored with discussing this stuff as well sometimes. Yeah, we see grammar school days of the 1950s, lots of talk about Pythias, Greek visitor to British shores in 340 BC. We see a lot about Tacitus's writings. We know the caution that we must attach to those. But nowadays, I don't think, particularly in Wales, I don't think school children go anywhere near learning about these or knowing about these things. And, what a shame. So, yeah, of course, the Roman writers, Tacitus and the other historians, writing in the sort of 1st century AD. But for Western Britain, Wales, Pythias is really interesting. Barry Cunliffe's written the more recent book on Pythias's voyages. But there's a lot... glimpses, gleanings of this lost book he wrote on the ocean in 320 from his circumnavigation of Britannia. But he landed at Ichthys, this offshore trading island in Cornwall, and saw a tin trading fair and talked to the locals. We know that later geographers like Strabo were probably quoting from Pythias to dismiss what he said. So all Strabo's famous comments about Britain being a place for hunting dogs and slaves and the export of gold and minerals. Probably Pythias writing that in the sort of 3rd, 4th century BC potentially. So we go back, we have this reference to the Britanni people, the painted or tattooed people. That's what the people were referring to themselves in the Greeks' time. The Britanni of Britannia, the Britannia Islands, changed to Britannia by the Romans. But even these early things, you see, the Welsh word for Britain is Prydain, with a P. It's the Greek form of Britannia that the Welsh are still using to describe Britain. So that's lasted 2,000 years. But, in the Roman histories, we have these clashes of the Silures, the Ordovices, the hammer fighters, these clashes between the AD 40s and the AD 70s of that conquest of Wales. And we have glimpses of what was going on from Tacitus's histories and annals. But I still think, we've got to work with those. That's the closest we can get to a first-hand account. Or he's talking to his father-in-law, Agricola, and what Agricola remembers from what was going on. So I think they're still really fascinating histories.
Yeah. So you think, again, as you said before, because we're so far removed from this context, there is this question of how these people saw themselves. The Romans are very keen to make definite tribal groupings, and we often wonder if they're not really going into the details or the nuance. There's they're the Silures, that's them, and they might not be really understanding the sort of finer dynamics of how these communities related to each other.
It would have been a lot more granular. I mean, my PhD work in the West Wales showed on sort of Hillfort designs, shared Hillfort designs are about every 15 to 20 kilometres in Western Wales. So you have much smaller groupings of people, doing the same thing, building Hillforts in the same way. But there is something to be said for the sort of smaller groupings described, I think, by Roman authors. The Decliangi tribe up in the northeast, the Cluidian Hills. We have a distinctive group of hills there, and very rich lead silver seams that were exploited in Iron Age times and then in Roman times as well. The Gangani tribe, tied down to the Llŷn Peninsula in North Wales, where we have those great stone forts, Tre'ceiri, Garn Fadrin, Garn Bodin. So we see a sort of distinctive, potentially distinctive tribal entity on the Llŷn Peninsula. If that's the Gangani people, by the time the Romans come, then that's really interesting. One translation of that, the Goose Eaters, the Gangani. So I think, 200, 300, 400 BC, complicated. Probably complicated still when the Romans came. But we see the tenacity of that tribal name. So Roman Caerwent, Civitas capital of the Silures people, where they were forcibly settled. Yeah,
well, this is interesting. I popped there the other day. I saw this in the book, and I was like, when I'd last been to there, I'd missed that. So yeah, I drove there in the afternoon to try and just make sure I got to the church before it closed. And sorry, you go ahead.
No, but the church is brilliant. It's got the civic inscription in the church they dug up a few decades ago. And I can't remember the date. It's a couple of centuries into the Roman conquest. Yeah. People are living peacefully in Roman Caerwent, Venta Silurum. But there it says, the Council of the Silures. It's there in Roman script on the thing. Yeah. So they're living in a Romanized town, living a Roman life, but there's still the Council of the Silures. That's something they would have told to their children, the brave times that they lived in Hillforts. So we see this tenacity of the tribal name. And of course the Romans shipping lead out of northeast Wales through Chester have Decliangic lead stamped on the side of the lead ingots, the lead pigs, as a badge of quality. This is the tribal area from which this lead is coming from. So those tribal names are real and fixed by the time the Romans are plundering Wales.
And of course, there's the intriguing possibility that, like an outside pressure from a force, that can really galvanize identity. And so, it's interesting. We're much better on this nowadays, I think, rather than thinking right, the Romans come to Britain and everyone puts on a toga at once and we're all Romans now. Quite the opposite. You see a community which is defining themselves by this historic grouping, as opposed to we're all just Romans, from here to Syria, we're all part of the same happy family. It's no, not really. These people are seeing themselves through their historic, Welsh identity.
I mean, not to digress, this is again, we're trying to get down to the granular people detail, getting away from those distribution maps in books. Roman camps, those histories. These Roman camps measured 400 metres by 300 metres. They were built in 3 phases as the Romans advanced across Wales. It's what did that actually mean? If you were living in AD 55 in Wales, still on a family farm, not quite conquered by the Romans, and the fighting force of 6,000 to 7,000 professional soldiers arrived 2 miles from you by 5 o'clock in the evening and start encamping,
Yeah.
And you tell this, I was lecturing in Llandrindod, North Wales last winter, talking about Roman camps. And, people talk about Roman camps for 5 decades and writing about them. You say, well, what if the British Army, our friends, what if 7,000 soldiers are encamping on the outskirts of the town tonight? Imagine the impact on the people on a modern town of 7,000 soldiers camping outside your town. And people don't think of it like that. They think, oh God, that's huge. And 7,000 enemy soldiers. And then in the morning, there are 3 blasts on a cornu, these big Roman trumpets echoing out from the hills that the army is about to descend into the valleys. Absolutely terrifying. And this is the campaigning area we have in Wales. This is where the Iron Age ends and the Romans are moving through. And this is, so fascinating, terrifying, brutal, but so fascinating to get ourselves away from those distribution maps and actually think about the impact on the people, the tribes. Really, really interesting time.
Okay, so we're already kind of talking about the Roman invasion into Wales. Could you just give us some of the main beats? Because, of course, this is somewhat later than the initial AD 43 landings, which we see in all the history books. Like, how does this come about? Like this movement into Wales, sort of like later.
This is something that we have in Wales. I don't want to say it's too special to us, but we really recognise as part of the Welsh Iron Age, we had the latest Iron Age and Roman campaigning era. It runs from AD 40s to AD 80. So, the Romans landed Richborough in Kent, AD 43, and stormed through southern England. But there's lots of things that are interesting. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm not a Romanist. But it's where the Romans and the Iron Age meet. You've really got to start picking that to pieces. So AD 43, they land in Kent. By the late AD 40s, they're constructing Roman forts on the Welsh borderlands and pushing into Welsh territory, making rapid advances to the Decliangi up in northeast Wales and storming west to try and invade Anglesey on Ynys Môn and getting driven back there by the Boudiccan revolt. So even in the early years of the Roman conquest, they want to sort Anglesey out. They see it as a refuge for troublemakers. They see it as a refuge for druids as well. And what's emerging now as well is that the metals are really important. They're making very early incursions to the Clwydian hills, to the lead and silver as well. Then there's a sort of a resurgence of sort of fight back under Caratacus, this great regional leader who sort of galvanises the tribes, the Silures and other tribes of the Welsh borderlands, and he's met at battle around AD 50, AD 51, potentially somewhere on the River Severn. And Tacitus, in his annals, gives us quite a detailed description of the defeat of Caratacus. It's a really interesting description of a Roman battle against local tribes. And although it's written 30 or 40 years after the event, it's still a really critical description of Roman battles. And then they sort of push west in various incursions, building overnight marching camps to protect themselves in hostile territory. And finally then, under various Roman governors, Gallus Frontinus and others, who make incursions to Wales, Agricola arrives in AD 778. Agricola is Tacitus' father-in-law. Tacitus is Agricola, his book, great reading, but it's a eulogy to his father-in-law. You've got to be polite to your father-in-law, of course. Written to be declaimed to a crowd. But it's all we have. It's all we have. And it says, Agricola arrived at the end of the summer. Roman legions are sitting around a bit lazy. They've already had a couple of sort of squadrons wiped out by the local Ordovices, but they're hoping for a quiet winter. And Agricola rouses his men, rides in the van into what would have been northwest Wales, Gwynedd, into the sort of territory of the Ordovices, and cuts to pieces almost the entire fighting force of the nation. That's how it's written. Absolutely vicious. So somewhere Dolgellau, Tras Fynydd, around there, Snowdonia, Rurry, we have this Roman battle with the Ordovices, and then they rapidly establish Roman Saguntium up in Carnarvon. So that's a real potted history of finally subjugating Wales by AD 80, but we have this 30-year battle for power. It's interesting.
Yeah, and it's just right at the end there, it's notable that what the Romans really want is a pitched battle. Because, they know they're very good in the field, they know they can do this, and one of the problems they seem to have with Wales is that often that they're not able to get that engagement. The long drawn out, almost like Afghanistan kind of conflict is the nightmare scenario, because again, as we see throughout Welsh history, the resistance can melt away into the hills, and you can build all these fortresses, and you can have this force there, but without being able to have that pitched battle, you can never really sort of establish full control of the region.
No, exactly. But this is it's a really interesting time. I mean, I should mention as well, one of the critical bit of evidence has come out now. 2018. A chariot burial was discovered in Pembrokeshire by a detectorist and excavated by the National Museum in Heneb. And I'm fortunate enough to be involved in the Chariots in Cynefin project, which has just got funding under Mel Giles and Adam Gwilt. And why that chariot? That chariot is buried about AD 50. See how late that chariot burial was. It's the latest chariot burial in northwest Europe, the only one south of Scotland in England or Wales. And it's all a bit strange. The chariot fittings are quite Romanised in the way they look. But the chariot burial in Pembrokeshire, far west, shows the critical collapse of everything the Iron Age people knew was real and was theirs. Their land's gone, their metals have gone, their way of life is collapsing. Where are the gods, to help them? And you can see this desperate burial of a chariot as a sort of way to, as a sort of last pleading. Maybe an elderly warrior's been buried. We don't quite know the context, more research to do. But this is a frightening time in Western Britain. Yeah. It bounces back by 100 AD, AD 100. People are living in Romanised Hillforts. Thank you very much. Got nice round houses, and we're using Roman pottery. But this is a difficult time, and I don't think enough time's been spent looking at it. I know my National Museum colleagues agree with me, and this is the next 10 years. We've really got to start picking this apart, getting that evidence out where we can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that seems like a very good note to finish. I mean, there's so much more I wish we could cover. I mean, this has been absolutely fascinating. Toby, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this.
Real pleasure.
Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you guys want to find out more about this, the Hillforts of Iron Age Wales, it's a brilliant read. Not only is there loads of great detail in there, it also has, towards the back, Toby's have curated like a sort of top 10 of sites which are really worth visiting. When I was going back through those the other day, I was like, oh man, I've only hit like 5 of these so far.
Nearly impossible. It should be a top 100, but it wouldn't have fit in the book. So.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, this is what we're trying to do with our Wales episodes. We're getting there. At time of writing, I still have further to go. So after we've had this conversation, I've got a trip to North Wales coming up in a few weeks' time where I'm going to be seeing a few more of these. But Toby, thank you so much. And otherwise, we'll catch you all very soon.
So yes, huge thanks to Toby. Links for the book are in the description. Don't go on insert name of ethically questionable online bookstore here. Get it direct from the publisher and in a small way support what Toby is doing. As far as us, this in the future will probably go in the playlist for Hillforts Season 2, but if you're seeing this when it comes out, there's a whole playlist of Hillforts Season 1 to explore. You can catch our discussion about Dorset with Dr Miles Russell in there. We're about to embark on some slightly different episodes from further afield, whether it's going dolmen hunting in the Loire Valley, or ancient Hellenistic sites in Albania, or Slavic and Viking settlements in northern Germany, some Doric temples from Greece. A lot of ancient stuff, but also smaller scale trips around the UK talking about how we survive the winter when the filming conditions aren't as great. So really no shortage of ancient stuff to see, and we post a lot of this more regularly on Blue Sky, so you can catch Toby and myself and Miles and the rest of the Hillfort community on there, particularly on hashtag Hillforts Wednesday. Don't forget the S on Hillforts. Massive shout out to everyone on there, past and present. And if you enjoyed the music in the back, sorry, this call to action is taking a bit long. What can I say? We're up to a lot. The music in the background is ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can catch it all on bandcamp.com. If you want to support us at the channel, that's the best place to do it. Otherwise, drop a subscribe. You know what, let me just give you a shopping list a second. So, open Hillforts Season 1 in a new tab, check our channel to see what we've done recently, subscribe on your way past, and for that to really work, you do kind of have to hit the bell, otherwise the platform often just doesn't show our stuff to you. And for afters, head to Blue Sky, look for hashtag Hillforts Wednesday, and pull up bandcamp.com to support us, and head to Logston Press to get Toby Driver's book. Yeah, that should do it. Right, see you all soon.